The thing is, though, is if you look at the churches, if you look at church attendance especially, if you look at Protestants, it's lopsided in favor of women. If you look at Catholics, it's lopsided in favor of women. There's more women, in other words, who practice the faith than men, except in Orthodoxy. In Orthodox Christianity, it's the opposite, right? Because it still keeps its patriarchal nature, right? It's always kept its patriarchal nature. Now, Catholicism is quickly catching up to that, right? When you look at Protestantism, it's not. It's not catching up to that. But what happens if you take immigrants from areas where they hold on to patriarchal religious values, Orthodox or Catholics or things like this, and you import them into your nation to replace the population which is not reproducing, right? All we have to do is look at their origin nations to see what happens to the rights of women, right? When they become the majority, they're gone. They're gone. In other words, the fight that really is already here that nobody even understands or knows about is that replacement ideology is here for the United States. It's already being replaced. The fact that these conversations are even happening, they weren't happening when I was a kid. They weren't happening when you were a kid. They weren't even happening. But they're happening now, and they're happening now because there's a much more patriarchal arm which is beginning to rise out of the ashes of a stagnant civilization. And I want to know how women respond to this. And when I ask women this question, they just kind of do this. It's going to suck for those future women. And I think in many ways, I guess it's self-correcting then. It's like a self-correcting problem. There's not going to be even the view, this view, I think, of modern feminism or even first wave feminism. I don't even think it'll exist in 100 years. I think it'll be reduced to the dustbin of history, and people will look back and laugh and say, remember what happened when they enfranchised women? Boy, that was a disaster, wasn't it? That's what I think.
Maybe, Andrew, what happens is that things change and women look around and learn what their intrinsic value is to men, and men, enforce that in a way, say like, hey, this is what I need from you. This is what I want from you. All this other stuff, I don't give a shit, right? And maybe the tides turn and you wind up with women. There's this perception that, I know people say the 1950s and all that, like women were, and all this. No one is advocating for, at least I'm not. Let me speak. I'm not advocating for force, physical, emotional, any of that. What I'm advocating for is maybe people aren't sitting, and maybe women aren't sitting in their feminine. And as a result, men aren't sitting in their masculine, and you're all friggin' unhappy. And if you just found a way to get back to that, everybody would be happy, and there'd be less antidepressants and less alcohol and less drugs and less all that crap and more family and all of that stuff. And I'm not saying the 1950s is picture perfect, but what I am saying is that there was a lot less crap going on, right?
But doesn't it come down to a matter of incentives? When you think about social dynamics, right? Intersexual dynamics between men and women, I don't even think are confusing. As confused as people want to make them, I don't think they're very confusing. I don't think people have ever been particularly confused about them. We know exactly where babies come from, and we know that men and women have been having sex with each other since the dawn of time, and they seem to enjoy it just fine, and their interpersonal dynamics don't seem to be something which people were ever confused about until recently. Now we have two of the most sexually confused generations on planet Earth, the millennials followed by the Zoomers. They can't even agree on basic things like if you have morning sex, if your wife wakes you up with morning sex, is it? They can't even agree on basic things like this, which are absurdities, right? Total absurdities. The thing that's interesting about it, though, is that within the idea of these social dynamics and the kind of sexual confusion of these two generations, is that isn't the ultimate white pill that it kind of just works itself out anyway. If feminism is truly a non-reproductive death sentence for the genetic lines of feminists, right, then isn't it just working itself out? Like, isn't it kind of reducing? Isn't it like a safeguard in society, which is saying, hey, look, this ideology just can't sustain. And ultimately, these women, they're just not going to have children, so they become reproductive dead ends, and that's kind of the end of that.
How fast till this clip gets titled something with the Handmaid's Tail in it, Andrew? Let's count.
Well,
Let's
it's
do the
funny because
countdown.
it's the isn't it? But isn't it the opposite of the Handmaid's Tale? Because the Handmaid's Tale is like, all the women are like sex chattel, right? Like that's the whole thing. This would be the opposite. It's like they're just not having sex and having children, right? And so it's a non-reproductive dead end. It's just a dead end.
Yeah.
If you don't replicate your genes, you die. And people who have the propensity
Correct.
for these ideologies, there's a genetic propensity for it too, right? You eliminate all of those genes from the pool, and it's self-selection. It seems like the problem takes care of itself in many ways.
It may. It may. I guess my goal, and maybe it will. Maybe it just all works out and everyone winds up happier and healthier as a result. My goal is to speed the process up to where people get to that happiness. I told you, if 1 out of 10 listens to what I'm saying, I do genuinely feel like if 1 out of 10 listens and their life can turn around for the better before it hits the fan, then great. That's really why I do what I do. It's also funny and entertaining and all that, looking at these guys. Sometimes I can't believe it, honestly.
But what do you think the incentive is for women to change? When I look at
the realization that this is not going to end well. What changes it is when younger women start to realize what 38-year-old women start to realize.
Right. So you're saying the incentive for women to change is that they have a realization this will be good for them if they do, right?
Well, the incentive is men.
Right. Exactly.
Men need to say, hey, this is what matters to me. Oh, you don't going to do any of those things? Okay, I'm going to go find someone who will.
Right.
Bye.
So the incentive for the woman though is like you're going to have a less good life. And so that's how we're going to kind of like rhetorically try to convince you that you should move this direction instead of this direction. I think ultimately though, the mistake that's a mistake. And here's why, because there's no propaganda behind it. So if you look, when people are talking about the 30s, 40s, 50s, things like this, there was national propaganda around what a man looked like, right? Even our physical education standards, right, inside of schools, significantly higher, right? Obesity, almost non-existent, right? There was propaganda from the top down for how family dynamics were supposed to work, period. That's all gone. There is no propaganda from the top down to socially reinforce what a family even is, what a man in their social role is supposed to be, and what women should be glorified for in society or not. Easy things, right? Like if you had roadside billboards that just showed, families walking hand in hand and said nothing more than that. And there was a little government message board and it just said, remember your duty, something like that.
There's plenty of propaganda. It's just the other way.
It's the other way, right?
It's everywhere.
But it's not even that isn't really done by the government, but NGOs and partisan groups and things like this who have a vested interest. Yeah, they have a vested interest in the destruction.
I will disagree with that, though. I think there's plenty of propaganda that comes direct. Like government and media goes hand in hand. That's
government officials aren't particularly bright. And
but it's an agenda.
Yeah, sure.
It's all agenda.
I agree with that.
They're all in cahoots.
But these are NGOs and things like this who influence politicians. I mean, politicians don't write their own bills, right? They sign them. They don't write their own laws. They just sign them. They don't do any of this stuff. It's always non-government organizations and think tanks and, groups like this who are outside agitators who run the influence in, right? But, ultimately, I guess I'm just saying, absent any of those incentivized propagandas for what should even be reinforced as being virtuous in society or good or something to move towards, right? I don't think you can convince women collectively to do or men.
I disagree. And then I do have to run and get my man, no problem. But I disagree. First of all, I'm a small government girl. I don't want the government giving me any messages because I don't trust any of that coming down the pike. But
did you trust them in the 50s, though? Would you have trusted them in the 50s?
I don't trust government ever. You know what Never? I trust? The dynamic in that. Let guys speak up. This is going to rest on men having a backbone about what they want. It doesn't. If you say, oh, I want, all this talk of, oh, I want, the good girl, so to speak. I want a woman who prioritizes X, Y, and Z. But if you're a guy and you're out at the bar giving time to all this crap, and you're not, it goes both ways. I need women to open their eyes and see what they're doing. This nasty stuff, all this stuff you're doing is hurting yourself. And I need men to speak up and not be afraid to say, this is what I need out of this relationship, or it's not worth it to me. And the more guys that do that, the more women will get the message of, wait a minute, I heard that same last week and the week before that. And the week, maybe this is, wait a minute, or hold on a second. If I don't do this, am I going to wind up alone? Because the perception is that they're not going to wind up alone, because there's always some other guy waiting to give them attention and say, yes, babe, we'll do whatever you want. What can I do? Oh, wait another 10 years? Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. There's too much of that. There's too much simpy crap. So the more guys that have a backbone, the more you wind up with that dynamic that I think you embrace the feminine, you embrace the masculine, and you have a more stable union.
Yeah, I just don't think you can do that. I don't think you can do that without social reinforcement. All superheroes, all superhero comics, right, that espouse all the virtues, Superman, that was all government propaganda.